Good morning, everybody. My name is Jonathan Gless. I'm here today with my co-host, Christine Jones, my colleague from the City of San Diego's Arts and Culture team, to have a conversation with a powerhouse panel of leading creative economy experts from throughout the US and Europe. Christine, it's great to see you this morning.
Question for you. What is the creative economy?
Well, it's a great question, and it's something that's been part of conversation for a very long time. Excuse me. And it's why we invited this group together today to give us an overview of really what the creative economy means, both in San Diego as well as internationally. Basically, the creative economy, which also is called the orange economy, doesn't have a singular definition, although many of us have been working towards a universal definition for a number of years. Ultimately, all things are local. And last year, the City of San Diego released a study on San Diego's creative industries as the starting point to define and better understand the local creative economy space and how it measures against other industries here at home. And importantly, where San Diego's strength may be when benchmarking with peer cities across the world. According to the United Nations, creative economy is an evolving concept that refers to the interplay between creativity and ideas and intellectual property, knowledge, and technology. As essentially, it is the knowledge-based economic activities upon which creative industries are based.
Okay, got it. So creative industries, which range from advertising to architecture, music, product design, and more, are really the essence of the creative economy.
Exactly. In fact, the study, which measured the size of the creative economy and identified characteristics unique to San Diego, spanned 71 industries and 77 unique occupations.
Okay, so we've seen that through the pandemic and even beforehand that creative industries are growing in significance and are likely to continue to develop post-COVID.
Yes, absolutely. And prior to COVID-19, San Diego's creative industries employed 107,000 people at nearly 7,400 creative firms and organizations and generated more than $11 billion annually. And it has a ripple effect in the broader region.
Okay, so today we're going to dig into the creative economy, its global rise and market importance, and how increase in diversity within creative industries can lead to more innovation, and how cities like San Diego can harness its potential growth.
It is our pleasure today to welcome you to Creative Economy Moving Forward from Local to Global. We want to take a moment to thank you for attending San Diego Design Week and spending time with us. This morning, we'll be hearing from our guest panelists, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Please note during the session, you should use the Q&A icon on your Zoom menu bar to submit questions for our panelists to answer toward the end of the session.
Okay, so I'm really excited about our thought leaders that we've lined up today, from academics to researchers to policymakers. So to kick things off, it is a real pleasure to introduce Edna Duesenberg. She is well known globally for her pioneering policy-oriented research on creative economy and spent nearly 30 years at the United Nations, authoring multiple reports on creative goods and services. So to provide some context on the global creative economy and sustainable development, I'd like to welcome Edna.
Thank you. Thank you. It's okay. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for this invitation. And I would like to say that I'm delighted to take part in this debate. But as time is short, I would like to start reflecting on wider context, because we know that knowledge, culture, and creativity have always existed everywhere. So what is relatively new is the perception of how this interface can drive economic growth, inclusion, innovation, jobs, trade. And we know that all countries, independent of their level of development, they have creative, active, and cultural assets. We also know that we live in a society in which people are more and more eager for culture, entertainment, leisure, and our lifestyle. It's really associated with the design, its brand, its status, differentiation, and all this are somehow embedded around the creative economy. So this, we also know today that the creative economy, it's really this point of intersection where the virtual and the real worlds coexist. And I think all this partially explains how the creative sector has been nurturing local business and revitalizing cities around the world. So the next slide, please. So that is, it's really the background in which in the early 2000s, in the turn of the century, this concept emerged. And initially it provoked a certain skepticism because the rationale was really to better understand, to grasp how these interactions between culture, economics, technology, and also the social aspects, how all this interact. And the fact is that for years, the economic contribution of the creative economy has been overlooked by governments, despite its stronger contribution for prosperity, like you just mentioned in this introduction. So this was when the United Nations launched this first report in 2008 with the intention to sensitize the governments to the importance of the culture and creative industries for development policies, and also to assist in policy making. So we tried to analyze the sector and to assist. And that in this way, this topic was somehow introduced in the so-called International Economic and Development Agenda. And now, 20 years later, the creative economy became a priority for local policies and global policies. And the UN declared this year the Creative Economy Year for Sustainable Development. So this is the way in which today, this conference and this year, it's very special, and we have a great opportunity to focus on the sector. So this next slide, please. Certainly the creative economy cannot solve all the problems. It's not a panacea, but certainly it is a feasible strategy in terms to promote socioeconomic growth. And as you have mentioned, it's really one of the fast growing sectors. And it is really very attractive for the youth, because all the sectors, the music, advertising, all the sectors are very attracted. So we have seen, in particular this year, during the pandemic, that culture, creativity, and connectivity became like the backbone of the society, because it was really what helped to keep people that was apart, close together. And we could see that without music, books, films, video games, news, life during the pandemic would have been unbearable. And digitalization really facilitated this process. So policies for enhancing the creative economy also promotes equity, cultural diversity, and can be very helpful also in this period of transition towards the green economy. Next slide, please. And is in this context that in summary, we consider that the creative economy is a transformative power that can lead this healing post-pandemic process. And for this, of course, we need appropriate policies in place to enhance the creative economy and for providing the institutional and policy framework to attract investors, to support creative entrepreneurs, and to attract the young creators, and at the same time promoting local urban creativity. So the creative nexus somehow can facilitate a kind of virtuous circles in which we would reinforce the nexus between investment, technology, entrepreneurship, and trade by stimulating private investments, attracting new technologies, and reinforcing sport-led creative business. So this synergy between governments and business initiative is essential to unlock solutions and shape the necessary incentives and regulations to support the creative economy. So with this, in this context, we will consider that now is the right time to have a design-led process to foster the creative economy towards a more creative, inclusive, and sustainable development for all. So that's what I wanted to share.
Edna, thank you so much for framing the larger context of the conversation. I think a couple important notes. Edna, your background is economics,
Yes.
and you've been working on a global level for a number of years. David Holland, who we'll be hearing from now, lives in the policy space, bringing it more national and regional. Edna, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us. You're hopping a few time zones right now to be with us, and we appreciate it. Next year, you'll have to join us on the beach.
That would be great.
But with that said, I'd like to turn it over to David Holland to share some thoughts with us.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Can everyone hear me? Can you see me? Is everything all good? All right, I guess you can. All right, so I will kick us off. I'm gonna talk about creative economy policy. Thank you, Anne. I'm gonna talk about creative economy policy and the design community. And what I'll start by saying is Edna did such a great job of outlining what the creative economy means and what its potential is and how important it is. In moving into the policy space, I think I'm going to get into some practicalities about what the current opportunity is to shape policy to support the creative economy. And I'll start by saying this is highly reductive. I'll first start there, but there is a way of perceiving this, especially the creative economy, as an agenda, like an advocacy agenda, something to influence policymakers and others around and to be supportive of, is essentially about three things: creative businesses, creative jobs, and creativity in the economy and broader society. So that's a really reductive approach, but I think it boils it down to some talking points. And depending on who you're speaking to, different people will be more motivated by one or the other of those. But as at least I imagine some of us on this call will know, most policymakers are really motivated by jobs and creating job opportunities for people, supporting business, and improving the overall economic environment and the societal environment in which we live. So in the broadest terms, the creative economy is relevant in all of those domains that are domains of concern for them. The next thing I'll say is that in this current moment, something is happening which creates a better environment to advance creative economy policy. And that is that the distinctions between the for-profit and nonprofit sides of the creative economy are being blurred. And when I talk about this, I am speaking about it mostly from a US vantage point, but I do believe that this applies in many other contexts around the world as well. And it allows for creative economy policy to happen because traditionally the focus of a lot of cultural policy, particularly in the US, but also in other countries, has been a focus on supporting nonprofit or third sector organizations and their contributions to arts and cultural life, more so than it has been to make any kinds of investments, focused investments in creative businesses. So an example of this in the US, to again bring it down and make it very practical, is something called the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant, also known as SVOG, that was administered by the Small Business Administration here. And SVOG is an initiative that was led by NEVA and has led to almost $10 billion of a $15 billion package meant to support the creative economy, especially those parts of it that are focused on live performance and on other public performances and experiences for people. Can you just move back a couple of slides so I can continue, just complete these other things? The other things we're going to talk about today are the Creative Economy Revitalization Act, which is a new effort and the focus of a lot of creative economy advocacy right now. And then I'm going to round out by talking about how the design community can be better involved in the policymaking process. So we can continue and forward through the NEVA slide and the overview of the investment in SVOG and go on to the next one. So this is the Creative Economy Revitalization Act. And in this moment, a number of members of Congress, having heard from the sector in the field, especially about the great unemployment of artists and creative workers, have wanted to respond with some kind of new federal initiative. A lot of people during this period, because it's a pandemic and crisis, have been inspired by the WPA, the Works Progress Administration, which was a New Deal program that created something called Federal Project One, which supported arts and cultural projects and directly invested in artists across the country prior to the existence of the National Endowment for the Arts in America. So being inspired by that, but also knowing some of the challenges of that initiative, they have created a new vision, these policymakers, along with a huge constituency in the field for a 21st century WPA, as they call it. Representative Ledger Fernandez, who is one of the architects of this legislation, says that as our nation recovers from the pandemic, we have a responsibility to lift up those who were hit the hardest. This includes our country's creative workers and the communities they serve. So we can move on to the next slide. And another thing that I'll say as we move through this is that important to the advocacy around this was a group called Be an Arts Hero, which is a new advocacy group, volunteer group that is artists and creative workers around the country advocating for their own interests and representing their own voice. And they engage directly with Representative Ledger Fernandez's office and indeed with others on the creation of this legislation. And these images I'm sharing with you today come from them and the assets that they've created for social media and communications around the legislation. Essentially, it's a $300 million investment to support direct grants and commissions to arts workers nationwide. It's explicit in how those funds can be used, and it is meant to help address, in some ways, it's only a $300 million program, but invest in artists to address some of the unemployment that they're facing. And indeed, artists themselves have generated a campaign to promote this legislation. It's now been introduced and is moving through various committee processes before ultimately being voted on. So we can go to the next slide. I think that this is indicative of changes and shifts in the policy environment that I want to now bring out and talk about the role of design and how design can be involved. So traditionally, a lot of policymaking is based on best practices, things that we know have worked before. It's often very past focused, looking at what has been, how effective it was, all of those things. It also, focuses on what those in the design community will readily know very well, archetypes, which again, you know about and work with a lot. And it's therefore often theme-based, universalizing, and all of those things. And it does contribute sometimes to a feeling of like an orthodoxy, like this is the order of things, if you will. A design-oriented policy approach is actually about creating new practice, entering into new territory, is futures-oriented. So what might be what's possible, and is more about creating prototypes, creating experiments, exploring, than it is reinforcing what has been and what known processes have been. And it allows us to learn and develop. I'd say in creative economy policy making and in cultural policy making, we're entering into a phase that is more a design-oriented approach, even if people are not directly aware of that, because we are being called upon to create something very new and imagine something very new. And that's why I feel that designers can contribute and advance and refine and really take a lot of this work to the next level through their participation, because the work as designers apply it in the private sector, in the public sector, and other spaces does allow for that. And I will say in many of the conversations that are had around creative economy policymaking, there is not enough of a design voice that could really help to forward this work. So we can move to the next slide. And this one, forgive me for being a little bit wonky and a little bit esoteric, but I thought that this would be a good way to round up my comments, that kind of describes the difference between traditional policymaking and a more design-led approach and a more futures-oriented approach. This is the way that designers can contribute across the landscape, including at that policy level, also at a systems level, and also like in the touch points of day-to-day life. And I'd say that, this slide in many ways, speaks for itself, but this is really looking at, and you know this already, but I'm just trying to reinforce what you know. The designers give form to things. And this is an environment in which there is a lot of need to restructure the way that we live our lives, especially in a supposedly post-pandemic, but really continuing to deal with the pandemic reality. And you know this, our home lives, working lives, the way that we navigate space and interacting with each other, all actually needs redesign in this moment. I think we all know that, and some of that work is happening. Then at a system level, there's the need to rethink systems and services, especially in an environment in which we're going to be pushed more into the virtual space that Edna elucidated about the virtual worlds and physical worlds colliding. We're now more inhabiting a space in which we're balancing those, and how do we redesign our systems and services to facilitate that. And then at the policy level, in the way that I just described, that design process and design thinking, I think is so vitally needed in the policymaking space, because we are tending to still lean on what we know from the past which we all know hasn't really worked, especially for many of us. So I will conclude there by saying I think that there's a tremendous role for design to assume more leadership in this space. And I feel that it is a time in which the design community and the different institutions that you all support should step more firmly into a role of advocating on behalf of your interests as an industry and being more involved in the policymaking process in general. Thank you.
So thank you, David. Really interesting. I'm really excited about that bill that's moving forward in legislation. So we're going to move on to our next panelist. So I'd like to introduce Jason Chupac. Jason is currently the Dean of the Westville College of Media Arts and Design at Drexel University in Philadelphia. And I'm really interested in learning more about what he's doing with creative industries and moving design forward in the 21st century. So Jason, welcome.
Hi, I'm so thrilled to be here. It's actually Westfall College. It's so Game of Thrones sounding. We need like an emblem. I think I go to my first slide. I think David's said a lot that I thought was incredibly powerful and interesting. And Edna, I mean, it's an honor to be on this panel with you. You've been an inspiration for me for years. I actually was a creative economy director for the state and used Edna's research when we were trying to figure out what that meant in the state of Massachusetts. I mean, I think my general message I wanted to get across was that we are in a great moment of disruption. And what David said about it is a time to lean in because things happen in 2020, right? And a lot of things we kind of thought were orthodoxies about policy or about the way things should work are gone or changed, and amazing things happened. So you go to the next slide. I mean, one thing that I never thought in my life I would see would be guaranteed income programs for artists, and they're actually happening, right? The incredible amount of money that came out of the SFOG program for venues that David was talking about. I mean, that $15 billion, the National Endowment for the Arts has given out $4.5 billion in its 53 or 54-year history. So in 1 year, we tripled that, right? So like there's sort of never been more money to do this work with. I mean, the assets that are on the street right now, the assets that are coming out of the bills that already exist, it's an incredible opportunity to think differently. And so I kind of wanted to inspire people to think that, the way we've been operating and supporting these businesses, their role in our future economy, which sort of no one knows exactly what it's going to be yet, can and should be rethought, and we should not sort of rest on what has happened in the past. And if you go to the next slide, I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about from the past that, we've been kind of stuck. I mean, Professor Maria Rosario Jackson, who talks about this a lot of the creative economy work, a lot is that we've not achieved the things we want to achieve for all of the people in America. And we seem to be stuck because we're using kind of the same processes and policies. And what does it mean to imagine something different to help us kind of get unstuck? What does it mean to imagine getting unstuck? And I think included in that, you must have this anti-racist frame. It's just so important. I think it's no joke in the last year that there's been a 400 years in the making reckoning around race in our country. And it needs to be included in this work. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'm just encouraging you all I'm going to just be really brief so we can get to conversation. I'm just encouraging you all as you start to look at what does it mean to support, to lean into the policy work, or to talk about structures that might support the growth of this industry in San Diego, that you don't need to think, number one, there's never been more money. Like the richest people in the world are the richest they've ever been. Government is giving out more money than it's ever given out. Foundations are giving out more money than they've ever given out. So what does it mean to use that money to get unstuck? What orthodoxies do you need to unsettle? Did we ever all think we'd be sitting in the middle of streets eating? Right? This is a simple example, right? I mean, think about how we've just completely changed the policy around street use. And I don't think anybody wants to go back from that. We got unstuck really quickly on that. So I know I'm being kind of high level, but I think if you're thinking about, I just ask everyone when they're talking about wanting to do something to sort of ask yourself two questions. One is, what are we copying from the past that has kept us stuck, that we don't want to take with us? Like somebody said about the pandemic, Carrie, the pandemic is a portal to a new future. And it was, oh, she's like my favorite poet and I can't believe I'm forgetting her name. It's like the pandemic is a portal to the future and carry as little luggage as you can through it, right? And I love that metaphor. And the second thing is with everything that you do, like stop and ask yourself, does this hold up in equity? And especially racial inequity. Like every policy you do, everything you're doing, like if I do this again, is it going to keep the same problem going on racial inequity? And just if you don't stop and ask in every moment, it will continue. And so I'll just sort of leave my comments there.
Jason, that's really beautiful. Thank you for that. And thank you for being so simple in your messaging. So I'd like to turn it over to Mai Nguyen, who is the director of the University of California, San Diego Design Lab. I'd like to preface this, Mai, very quickly by acknowledging that you, number one, you are new to the Design Lab and new to San Diego within the last year, number one. And number two, that we are reimagining San Diego and Tijuana right now through our bid process for World Design Capital. So much that all three of our speakers have already spoken to. You're front and center to a lot of that work. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Mai, to share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan, and good morning, designers. I'm delighted to be a part of this esteemed panel. You know, being last is a little intimidating after all of the brilliant things that have already been said. I'm going to take maybe a 10,000-foot view by talking about how we design systems that promote equitable economies, including the creative economy. Next. So I'm an urban planner. And so one of the fun things that I get to do is to research and teach about utopian cities. And my utopian city is one that is human-centered, that is really built and designed at the human scale. So many of our city planning decisions actually prioritize other factors other than humans. For example, cars instead of pedestrians. And so when I think about human-centered, I also think about the future and leaving cities better for the next generation. So this encompasses things such as sustainability, but also closing the racial wealth gap. My utopian city is also economically diverse so that there are jobs and opportunities for a wide variety of people, including creatives. This makes for a very vibrant and thriving economy. My utopian city is also resilient with reinforcing systems and structures that can withstand shocks like this global pandemic that we're currently experiencing. And finally, the city is equitable and inclusive, offering a wonderful quality of life for all families who feel a sense of belonging and real connectedness within their communities. And once we've gotten here, we've designed and built my utopian city. Next. Unfortunately, we are far from achieving my utopian city. We have instead these systems and structures that are creating a lot of human suffering, things that Jason talked about earlier and also David. We're emerging from the worst pandemic of our lifetime, one that is both a health and economic crisis. It's had a disparate impact on women, Blacks, and Latinos, and some of the most underserved and vulnerable populations in our society. And COVID isn't the only pandemic. As Jason mentioned earlier, structural racism is another pandemic that is pervasive across institutions and social structures. We're also experiencing extreme and intense weather events, those that are the most extreme in our recorded history, costing us billions of dollars and forcing families and businesses to rethink how we live. We're also experiencing this incredible generational wealth gap, one that is leaving millennials worse off than their parents. The first generation that might be worse off economically than previous generations. And then there's this vast difference in housing experiences. If you recently bought a home in San Diego, like I did, you experienced this frenetic buying of houses in a hot housing market that are pushing housing prices up to astronomical levels. But on the other end of the spectrum, there's this looming foreclosure and eviction crisis with 11 million households at risk of losing their homes once the CDC's moratorium on evictions and foreclosure ends. And this just shows that all of these factors are contributing to what economists are calling a K-shaped economic recovery, where some industries and communities are not bouncing back from this economic downturn. And a lot of these, and some of these industries are the creative industries not bouncing back from this economic downturn. Next. And many of these disparities that we see in our society are due to unequal access to capital. Some communities don't have access to building human, social, and financial capital. And this isn't just accidental. This has been built into our social, economic, and political systems. Our long history of colonization, slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and the many ways that our social, economic, and political systems have discriminated against groups, which has led to unequal access to capital that's resulted in economic inequality. So when we think about building equitable economies, and particularly the creative economy, as we're talking about today, we need to build human, social, and financial capital in all communities and not just some. Next. And this is related to, I think, one of the slides that David actually showed, the ones with the concentric circles. So what does a process for designing equitable communities look like? And this is the process that I think about and use when thinking about designing equitable communities. So instead of starting with a needs assessment, which is a deficit-based model, start with a community assets model, which really identifies strengths and assets that can be built upon. And then once you've identified those strengths, co-design with the relevant stakeholders, the people that you seek to serve. This is a true partnership that requires authentic community engagement. And then once you've settled on a policy or program or a practice, pilot it. Once it's implemented, get feedback, monitor, evaluate, and determine whether it's worthy of being scaled and replicated. And starting with a small pilot gives you the freedom and the license to fail. Failing is part of the process. However, if the pilot is successful, then the next step is to really scale it up and expand it. And once you see the success and scale it up, then you start to see systems change. And what's critically important throughout this whole process is stakeholder engagement throughout the entire process. And also that these stakeholders feel economically and politically empowered, that they actually have the voice and the power to create change. And I think that if designers infuse this equity lens throughout their design process, we would be closer to achieving equitable economies.
Mai, thanks so much. All of you, this has been really insightful with all of these different ideas. And so what we'd really like to do is just, Jonathan and I have a couple questions for our guests today, and then we're going to open up to the audience. So what I'd like to get started with, I think Jonathan might have the first question, and I think it's going to be targeted to Edna.
Of course, and I'd like to open this to the whole group, but Edna, if you could kick it off. Given this context, firstly, thank you everybody for these. This is actually, the flow of this conversation has been really perfect. Thinking about where we are right now in San Diego, and I keep coming back to, well, what is the role of designers in our community now, which all of you have pointed to. But Edna, stepping back for a second, San Diego is also in this mode of being very ambitious and moving into more of a global space. What is the role of creative economy in large urban centers, and in particular, binational centers? And then I'd like to open it up to any other comments.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to come back to the situation we are facing now that is so different and has changed so much everything. So we know that this pandemic changed the world in a very irreversible way. No, so I really think that our lifestyle has changed, and this has incredible impact in urban centers and large cities like San Diego and many others. Why? Why? Because I think some practice that we started using because there was a behavior change. And I think much of this will continue and will prevail in the near future. So, for instance, particularly if you think that unfortunately the pandemic is becoming endemic, and this means that will not be business as usual. And I don't see a new normal, will just be something completely different. So I think the present is already very different from the recent past, and the future remains uncertain. And I think so we have seen that crowded urban centers became empty somehow. We have seen that many people, it's moving from large cities to small villages looking for a different quality of life. And I think this is a fact. So I think big cities really have to adapt and cope with the new reality, because cultural events will have less audiences. We home office will remain for a while, distance classes. So I think the whole dynamism of the cities has changed. But on the other hand, we have seen that already in the past, culture and the creative economy has helped us to be out of a previous crisis. And somehow they are playing their role today. So I think that the fact that many cities, districts, and municipalities benefited from emergency packages, and what was mentioned today, we are in a situation that suddenly we have triple of the budget we used to have before. I think it brings open of possibilities. So if I think a city, a multicultural city with a very skilled workforce, like the case of San Diego, I have seen in your study that one of the strengths, I think so, I think the big thing, the big challenge, it's really to build upon on its strengths and address the weakness, and of course, take into account the local reality. And in a city like San Diego, which has 70,000 jobs in the region, in the creative sector. So I think this is very indicative of a situation that we're living now and how the future will shape. No? So as the economy begins to recover, it is an opportunity to review policies. And I think the fact that most creative works have a computer science background is an advantage. I think that the fact that we are seeing much more and more the linkages between the whole question of equity and, for instance, impact investment. So I think this is really, and social investment. So I think this is really changing a lot. I think the fact that we have to look more close and to reinforce all the digital infrastructure, of course, in the US, this is not a big issue, but this is a big issue for many countries. But in a city like San Diego, I think this is already, how I say, a very strong driver for creativity and innovation. So I think the recognition of talents and the cultural identity, particularly from the small communities, I think also contracting artistic creative works like street art, like to have more artistic works in parks. So I think we can have a push from the public sector, and also a number of public-private partnerships will help. And maybe now the problem is different because funds are available. We have these bills, this, as was mentioned before. So I think the bill challenge is really try to rebound better. And I think we are in a moment to rethink everything, but particularly to put in place actions and projects and starting reviewing things that need to be tackled from a long time ago, and maybe now is the right time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Edna. Christine, do you want to jump to the next question?
Sure. So just kind of thinking about and kind of looking at the design sector specifically for a moment, I have a question I'm going to ask David first. So, okay, David, so how do you think the design sector will be, or how is it being affected by COVID, near term, long term, and how cities like San Diego can really provide support to really ensure that the creative industries are really growing and really continuing to grow here locally?
All right, thanks, Christine. So I'll start by saying, I'll try to be as brief as I can. The first thing that I'd say about where the design sector and industry is currently and what the outlook might be for the future in terms of the pandemic, I would say is mixed, and it depends on what part of the design industry you're in. So there's some research that was done during the pandemic, for example, with architects in the United States primarily. Apparently 8 of 10 architecture firms benefited from the Paycheck Protection Program loans, meaning that they had to utilize those to shore up their business. So that's 80% of architecture firms. So that is the specific context in that industry, and in associated industries like interior design, they were severely affected by the pandemic, and their business models were challenged and the structure was challenged in a lot of ways. Then I'd say in like a different kind of part of the design industry, like in graphic design, it's actually more mixed. And some of the signs from surveys that have been done with graphic designers are that their opportunities actually may have improved during the pandemic because some of the barriers to working with potential clients were dropped when everyone moved into a virtual environment. And indeed, for those who do freelancing, which is, a reasonable percentage of graphic designers, and even for those who do some freelancing and have a full-time gig, some of the data suggests that, like about 60% of them have more than 30 hours per week of work from just their freelance work on average. And a lot of them are very optimistic about what the future holds based on some of the transformation in their industry during the pandemic. So those two are just to highlight that depending on where you sit in the design industry as a broad spectrum of activities, it may actually look very different for you what the opportunities actually are. And for those parts of the industry that are more structured in terms of firms that provide services to people in a firm structure, like architecture, I think that is going to be challenged for sure. It is currently challenged, but I think that we're moving out of that. And some of the things I spoke about before pertain to this. We, as a society and as societies, will have to adapt our environment based on, as Edna so aptly put it, the pandemic becoming endemic So that means that we will have to make some more permanent and long-lasting changes to our built environment, our interior environments, the way that we operate in spaces and move through spaces and congregate with one another. All of that's facilitated by design. And so I do think that there's a lot of opportunity to be part of that as time moves on. And I do think from things that I just remember even seeing in the media, a lot of design firms have moved their business model to more affirmatively talking about their ability to address these challenges and create adaptations for all of us. So in terms of how San Diego as a city can support designers, I did think about it a little bit. I think in supporting platforms like this, like San Diego Design Week, is good to raise the profile of design in the community. I think design is often overlooked, unfortunately. I think that another way is to look at the planning process, procurement process, programs within local government, like within city government, and support opportunities for designers to participate across that spectrum, including perhaps even things like a designer in residence. We often have an artist in residence, but I think bringing design thinking into local government is wonderful. I think design districts, this might not seem like the moment to think about things like that, but those kinds of things are a tool for local government always to use. Again, I think creative districts, cultural districts, and those things are more utilized by city governments than things like design districts. And you have to think about how to do it well. But I think that there's a way to lift up an existing design cluster and again, support the visibility of the design industry within your community by facilitating a design district. I also think it allows you to sometimes apply different tax and incentive structures to support businesses being located there. So I think that that's important. I think supporting community design organizations. So as like a grant maker and your ability to support nonprofits, there are community design organizations across the entire country in every community of every size. I imagine that there's some robust organizations in your community supporting them, I think will be important. I think that recognizing that the state does have a role and the local government has a role, like the public sector has a role, but very much that the private sector has a role in this and will drive a lot of that work moving forward. And so perhaps facilitating industry networks where people can be networked with one another. I think a lot of the design industry is still very much built on those relationships between firms and driving work forward. And if you wanted to take a particularly evidence-based and strategic approach, then you'd look at what the industries are that support design within the city, probably be in conversation with your economic development colleagues and figure out how to facilitate the support of other industries that are supportive of design and how design also can be supported as an industry because of its relevance to industries that are prioritized by your economic development partners. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
That was like awesome, David. Can I jump in with two other things real quick? Like that was so awesome. When I was trying to figure this out in Massachusetts, you know, one thing that was I was in the Office of Economic Development, and what was really interesting is that we had a set of existing tools that we were applying to every industry except the creative industries, right? Like there were these tax incentive tools, there were all these other things, and I literally just like would go around to creative businesses and be like, did you even know you could use these things, right? I think kind of like working with your economic development office to see what tools already exist. Again, I think those tools need to be revisited. I think that one of the challenges though, if you're focusing specifically on the design industry, is that I'll just be blunt, it's super white, right? Like in the history of the United States, the number of African-American women that have gotten licensed as an architect is less than 500. Like, let that number sink in your head for a moment. And so you really need to look at the full ecosystem of equity and justice that surrounds those creative fields and see what systems are missing to help people. I hate the term pipeline, but to help people understand that these are jobs and that they're great careers and that you know, there's a lot of efforts working with all kinds of different populations to help them understand that creative fields are fields that they can go into, that these are real jobs. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in design of that. I mean, like when we were funding those kind of organizations across the country from the feds, there's not enough of them. And if there's not something like that in San Diego, it's an important piece of the puzzle to deal with the bigger ecosystem problem in design, right? Like you don't want to just start throwing all this money at the design field and then continue to hold up those injustices, that's not going to solve anything, right? Like you got to look at the whole ecosystem and issues. And so, and I'm not saying anybody's figured that out, trust me, but there's a lot of people working on it, and a lot of corporations that are putting money towards it. There's big organizations that have emerged post George Floyd that are trying to work on this, and like reach out to those folks. Say we want to be a pilot. Say we'll throw some money in if you throw money in. I mean, I think somebody wrote in the chat like we need to take some risks and try some things, and that is the exact right attitude.
Jason, thank you for that. Just a quick note on that. You didn't talk about we haven't talked about public education. Our visual and performing arts program at our public school system here is moving design under what we traditionally call arts education, specifically to address equity issues in design initiatives. So thank you for that. Mai, we're almost out of time, everybody. Mai, would you like to close it with any comments?
I'll just answer Christine's question about how we can support designers in the region. And I'll just say that if we win the World Design Capital bid, this will really elevate, I think, this region, both San Diego and Tijuana, as this global, center for design. And if you haven't checked out our bid process, I'm going to put it in the chat. It's a bi-national bid with San Diego and Tijuana, and it'll be the first, if we're selected, the first US city to be selected as the World Design Capital. And I think that the narrative behind this is, bicultural, binational, that we are in this region together, and that design transcends borders, right? And I think that that's an important message to have.
Thank you so much, Mai, and all of you today. This has been really interesting. I know we could keep talking about this all day, probably. I do see that we have one question from the audience so far, so I'd like to read that question to you if just we're running out of time, but I think it's important to see if we can answer one question from the audience. So the question is, based on the slide, design policy versus traditional policy, how do we square the need for more experimentation and prototyping with ingrained regulations and risk-adverse attitudes? Does anyone have any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Please, yeah.
I think oftentimes, we kind of are stuck in our own sector. And if we work across sectors, if we have partnerships, that we can leverage the power of and the resources and the flexibility that other sectors have. And I'll just comment from my own experience. I'm a housing scholar. And so oftentimes government has a lot of regulations and barriers to actually experimenting. So I often work with nonprofits or the private sector that can do different things at a different speed. And I think these strategic partnerships can really help us to advance some of our ideas more rapidly, and to try things out and to fail, and it's okay to do so.
Yeah, and I think that there are people that want to fund people to try to do stuff. When we were running programs that supported this kind of work at the National Endowment for the Arts, I was just surprised. I mean, number one, it's happening already all over the place, this kind of work, and there's a huge network and a bazillion examples of people doing this kind of work now. I mean, the pioneering work that Edna did really led to just years and years and years of amazing stuff. And so much of it was just a group of people that were sick of being stuck and got together across sectors and said, can we just try something? And we're just going to do this. And we just please give us some money to try this and go for it. And I think a lot of the times we found the biggest barrier to people getting something done was their own preconceived notions that they wouldn't be able to get it done, right? And once they got in the room and actually tried, they could just figure it out. They just tried it, and it was, we didn't care as a national funder if it didn't work. I mean, the whole point was to see if it worked, right? So I don't know. I'm just encouraging you to we got to take some risks right now, people. Things are not good.
Thanks, Jason. So that really ends. I don't see any other questions coming in from the audience. I'll wait a second, see if there's any other questions. I can't thank you enough, all of you, for being here today again. And also to our audience. You know, this went over a few minutes, so appreciate you staying on the line and listening and really being part of this important topic. This is just the beginning of our conversation here in San Diego, and we want to continue that.